do creation alone. He has a wife, girlfriend, partner. And Izanagi and Izanami were the last of 7 divine generations of deities that were self-born. And this is interesting. So they were self-creating. And that's like Ptah, who was self-creating in Egyptian mythology, and who was also the creator god. But they eventually get interested in sexuality. So basically, Izanagi invents sex with his girlfriend or wife. And then that creates the physical world. Because up till that point, the deities were just like filmy things flying around, semi-transparent. And the world itself was semi-transparent. Only when sex comes into the world can we have embodiment as physical bodies. And so, depending on your view on matter and life, I mean, the Japanese people have ambivalent feelings about embodiment. I was told by a Japanese friend that every Japanese person is a dualist in that they get married in a Shinto temple. They love sexuality, they love fecundity and all that. But they also have an eye to the void. So they have funeral rites in the Buddhist community who pray for their eternal soul. So they have life-affirming Shintoism plus kind of spirit-affirming Buddhism. And Izanagi was the life-affirming deity. There's also interesting history, which I don't have time to go into, of the reception of Buddhism into Japan from about the 4th century onwards. And that's when the Kojiki was written down, the Shinto text that we know about Izanagi from. And a lot of Japanese became Buddhist, but it went to and fro, depending on what the emperor or the leading aristocrats thought in any epoch. Some were more friendly to Shintoism, some were more friendly to Buddhism, and it wavered. But I think in the end, by about the 16th century, most Japanese intellectuals realised you needed both. And you couldn't be a proper intellectual in Japan unless you were fluent in Shintoism, knew about it in detail, studied it, because it was the origin of the Japanese language, right? And they were proud of their culture and heritage. So they knew about these sacred texts, but they also knew about Buddhism, and they studied all the different advanced schools of Buddhism. Particularly Tendai Buddhism initially, which was a very ritual. And what they were doing in Japanese Buddhism was pacifying the spirits and educating them. So they said their position was, yes, these spirit beings, these kami exist, but they're also in very complex chains of suffering. They have karma. I mean, for instance, poor old Izanagi, I don't want to spoil the plot, but at one point, his wife, Izanami's vagina, gets burned by flames. I'm not going to go into the symbolism of this, but you can read the text. And now there's tragedy even for the gods. Okay, and that resulted in her going into the underworld, and Izanagi had to go after her, which is a bit like some of the ancient Sumerian legends, Inanna and so on. So embodiment is not all easy. The vagina can get it set fire. It was set on fire. So even the gods suffer, said these Tendai Buddhists, and therefore the Buddhists were doing rituals even for the kami. And so when you're doing advanced Buddhist rituals and prayers in your monastery, it was believed the gods come, because they can benefit too from the teachings of equanimity, non-attachment, and enlightenment, because even gods want to get enlightened. And just because they're gods doesn't necessarily mean they're enlightened. There can be, and there are in Japanese mythology, negative gods, as there are in most religions. So by the 17th, 18th century, there's this tremendous interfaith thing going on in Japan. brilliant Shinto scholars who were fluent in all schools of Buddhism. And they were writing about each other, you know, and so you were like an interfaith person, by definition, if you were an intellectual. And I want us in Europe to be the same. I want us to be pagan and Christian, so to be fluent in all these traditions. I've always said Druidry is the Shintoism of Britain and Europe. Therefore, we should all be fluent in it. But it's not even taught in our schools, unless you happen to have a Druid teacher. And that's ridiculous. At least the Japanese kept their Shintoism. And now, of course, it's come back because of ecology and the importance of nature. So it's you know, I mean, Japan has gone so far down the techno world, everything's cyber and robotic and away from nature, that they're now coming back and realizing that actually nature is far more intelligent than all the AI tools in the universe. I mean, just to do things like photosynthesis and cell division and conception and all the complexity of the human heart, which has just been studied. I mean, these are masterpieces of Izanagi.
I think something to note though is that Japan is such a big place that as much as it seems as it might have been lost in places like Tokyo and the big cities, I don't think it has been in the countryside.
No, the ancient traditions live on. Yeah. Apparently, just to say, I have a book about, there are phallic statues all over the countryside in Japan, which are shrines to their Izanagi. You know, it's a thing. You pass the down the country lane and there's another phallus. So I mean, they love their the metaphysical side of Eros, we can call it, which is, yeah. I'm not sure why my book Wisdom Affairs hasn't been translated to Japanese. I think maybe we should work on this. I think it would go down well. And right, now let's look at the next one. And Armel, you called that one forth, didn't you? And you've spent time in Japan. So, you know, it's obviously the spirits of the Kami of Japan are still lingering about you. Did you went to Shinto temples when you were there a bit?
Yes, because there are many everywhere, so it's very easy to go.
And they let you in, you could just wander in and...
Yes.
Did you take your shoes off and stuff? Is it protocol?
Yes, once you enter the temple, yes, but you can stay in front of the temple, and you have the door at the beginning, the torii. It's even if you are not in the temple, you feel like you are in a sacred place. Because it's the nature is en français, I may say sanctifié.
Oh, okay, nature becomes sanctified.
Yeah. In that place.
Yeah. I just want to share that, I don't know if I've shown you, but I have one book on the metaphysics of Shintoism called The Looking Glass God, by an American author who studied Shintoism for years, lived in it. And it's about the metaphysics of yin-yang and duality and unity and the spiral, because there are three sacred treasures in Shintoism. There's the sword, which stands, according to this interpretation, for the nervous system and the central nervous column. That's the sword, which does intellect. But then there's this this other thing, which is the jewel, which is shaped like a seahorse, little curly shape, and which stands for the kink in nature that gives rise to fecundity. It's like the embryo. Life isn't made of straight lines, it's curves. And that's the jewel, which is in the Shinto major shrine at Ise.
Ah.
Don't suppose you saw it?
No, I didn't notice.
No. And then the third jewel, which is in the highest shrine of Shintoism, is the mirror. The mirror is the ultimate symbol for Shinto metaphysics. And he studied all this stuff and explained it that, I mean, the mirror is a symbolism in Sufism, in many other religions, because ultimately it's the self knowing the self. We are, is an army or is an argy. We are the creators here, you know, and we created this world.
We forgot it, but unfortunately we forgot it. It's most often.
Well, that's it. And so now people are destroying the world. They've forgotten they're the creators.
The last line of my favourite poem, the Hölderlin one, is only those who are themselves godlike believe in the gods. I think that's a relevant
I wish you'd bring that poem to the philosophy club.
Well, I keep telling you that.
Yeah, but
I
where is
keep
it?
giving
You
you a
keep
line
saying-
like every few days. For a poem. It's a good poem.
Okay, well, when you've gone, I'll read it out in your honour next week when you've gone.
Sounds like I'm dying.
Well, you're going to Britain. I mean, you know,
Yeah.
you're leaving the sacred continent of Europe, mainland, and going back to one of the offshore islands. But no, there are good people in Britain. You'll be fine. And so the mirror is the other sacred thing, which is about consciousness, and that's the idea in the Upanishads. I am the self within me is the creator, etc., etc. Buddhism. So that's interesting. These three jewels. So if anyone wants to know about Shintoism, look up this amazing work, The Looking Glass God. It's cool. Right, let's come now to Saturn. Saturn, the three of Earth in this system here. And he is the deity of Saturday. So he lives on in our language, even though as a god he is not really honoured or known about. But we do have Christmas coming before long, and that's the Saturnalia. So that was his festival every year. And in the Saturnalia, the Romans used to give each other gifts and presents. And that seems to be the origin of Christmas, gift giving. Saturn was a fun god who liked, life, generosity, parties, celebrations, and he was the god of the Golden Age. So when Saturn was ruling, he used to be the chief of the gods until Jupiter took over and challenged him. But in the Roman mythology, which I prefer to the Greek on this matter, there's a peaceful handover of power. Saturn is still alive. He's in charge of the afterlife in the far west, according to Roman religion. We'll all meet him. And he looks like a kindly old Santa Claus type person, which is appropriate, given that he is the god of Christmas, essentially. And he had this beautiful wife called Ops. And Ops, have you come across Ops before? She was a Roman goddess who was very fecund and beautiful. She liked her fruits and very buxom. And they loved each other very much. And she's the origin of the word office and opulent. If you go into the etymology of Ops, one of my favourite games is to trace the gods in all the languages of words. And if you trace the Ops words, they're all about opulence. And the word copy, to copy, including photocopier, comes from Ops. So she wants us all to be opulent and make copies. So they're a great couple, these deities now. And he had a temple in Rome. And still, to this day, he is shown as holding a sickle in most things, which is why he's holding a sickle. And the Druids, of course, were famous for their sickles. So there would have been conversations in the ancient world between priests of Saturn and the Druids. And they would have spoken, they would have agreed with each other, I think. He's also described by Plutarch, who had studied both the Roman and the Greek gods and was the Grand Master of Delphi at the time and the head of the Delphic Games. He writes Saturn was depicted as veiled because he's the father of truth. So, anyway. us what you see. What do you see in the card? My voice is gone.
Are the children are theirs?
Yeah. So he's like a sort of benevolent pagan deity, a bit like Izanagi. And he had an equivalent in the Etruscan world as well. And Plato talks about him and says that he rules the Isles of the Blessed. Yes, I suppose these gods represent the sort of mythology. What Plato was trying to do was to find what they really mean in practice, as it was, philosophically. And so if you've drawn Saturn into your spread today, you're to be congratulated, says the text, because he's one of the most genial of all the gods. So that looks well and auspicious for your return voyage back to Britannia.
Wonderful.
Right. Okay, well I think we'll finish there. Anyone wants more detail, get the book, get the cards. We're getting some more cards printed in France. And, you need to get your own set. So that'd be good. And let's hope this coming week brings joy and the lead up to Saturn's golden age can come back to Earth. That's what we would like. Yes. There was a theory among the ancient classical scholars that El was the same as Saturn, and El was the original deity of Israel, and is in the word Elohim, and is related to Allah. And there is a school of thought that Saturn is El. That's what they used to say, scholars back 2,000 years ago. And that would be kind of neat if we could reclaim the Saturn story for both Arab Palestinians and Jews. Then they could, maybe agree to share the noosphere. I don't think any one tribe should control the whole thing. We share it, just like we share satellites going around the Earth. Yes, I wonder if Elon Musk sounds like El character, and he's taking over part of the noosphere. Is Elon related to El? I don't know the origin of that name, probably. So he's obviously an El chap. But I think we should make a peace treaty so that the gods, we need a peace treaty between the gods, actually, which I've tried in my interfaith thing. But, so we can't do it directly with the gods unless you're a psychic who can channel them. But we could do it with the priesthoods, and they could sign the peace treaty. So, a little plug, I've written the only interfaith peace treaty so far in the history of the world, where all the religions and their followers can pledge non-violence to each other. So have a look at that. It's got its own website. So then the El people can pledge peace to the Allah people, to the Saturn people. Why not? And the Izanagi people. What's wrong with this? I think we can all then go home and find the light within and clear the mirror. So we clear away the mirror and don't have bad reflections anymore. I think that's the idea of enlightenment. There are many Zen texts which point to this. Okay, we'll finish there. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thanks for listening and safe journeys.